Hey guys, Hollow1 here. Welcome back to another video, and today we're here with my legacy-equipped SGL Line Reading G3 Pacific, and we're going to be adding some features as well as repairing some damages from the last train show it was at. Regulars to my YouTube channel will be very familiar with this locomotive. There's a 2-hour video documenting how I installed Legacy in this engine, and if you've watched that video, you'll know that the encoder is kind of scuffed. In order for Odyssey Speed Control 2 to work in this engine, it needs motor feedback from an encoder, specifically an optical encoder. So to do this, I ripped the encoder ring off of a existing Lionel flywheel and 3D printed a plate so that it could adapt to the belt drive sprocket that is inside of this engine from the factory. That was sort of hodgepodge together and doesn't really hold up well under long times of running. At a train show, that is about as brutal as it gets for any particular locomotive. They are running for hours on end, they get very hot, and things tend to fail. In this case, that encoder ring became separated from that belt drive sprocket and is now just loosely flopping around inside the locomotive. The other issue that became very apparent at Tiger Tracks 2024, which was the last show that this operated at, is the antenna. I do not get good service from the TMCC remote or Legacy remote to this locomotive because the antenna is currently a very short wire that is stuffed underneath the running board on the engineer's side of the locomotive. Today I'm going to fix that by replacing the handrails on this engine with a small gauge black wire, and that should hopefully give me much better reception and allow this engine to run much smoother. So with all that out of the way, let's get started on the encoder. By the way, here's the antenna in its current state, and this is why it doesn't work very well. So we'll get to that later. First, let's start by removing the screw that is underneath the smoke box here, and the two on the back of the cab, and that will allow us to remove the chassis. Yep. Looks like it did when I left it. So I think I've identified the problem here. So as you can see, the encoder ring is still attached and it still passes through the sensor the way that it should. However, it is rubbing at one point on its stroke, and as I applied pressure here, I noticed that the ring, as you can kind of see in the background here, now at the top of its stroke, moves against its backing plate, which means that the glue did break free at that area. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some more glue to the inside of this after I sand it and scrape it a little bit to score it and allow the glue to have something to bite against. And then I'm going to clamp this encoder ring down against maybe the motor to pull it into its correct position and let the glue dry there. And hopefully that will correct the inconsistent motor feedback signal issue that I was having at the train show. Okay, so it's about here that I've got this pliability issue. So I'm going to just hold this flat and just kind of mark up the plastic a little bit just to give the glue something to bite into and sort of hold itself with. I'm not worried about this looking pretty because after all I'd say I'm the only one that's going to see this, but you guys are seeing it now too. But I'm really going to be the only person ever servicing this thing, so I'm not too worried about it looking ugly on the interior. Okay, so now that the scoring is complete, let's take this little 4-inch clamp that I got for like 12 bucks and apply some glue. I'm just using Loctite super glue because why the heck not? And let's apply some and clamp it down. Now getting the glue underneath is going to be a little tricky, so I'm going to try and pull it away slightly. Apply a little bit of glue. Sort of try to shove it underneath with the point of the applicator here. I see that the glue is moving, so that's a good sign. I'm going to open up my clamp. Hold down the bit where the glue is applied. And pinch it together That was a nasty crack. And I'm just going to hold that there and hope that I can remove that clamp after the glue is dried. I had also forgotten that this back panel here that goes underneath the cab roof had broken off at the train show. So I'm going to try to resolder this real quick, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. Well, that did not work at all, so I'm just going to go back to my original idea, which was to just glue it. So same process, just going to score it as much as I can, put on some glue, and let it sit. I don't have a resistive soldering iron set up, so that would definitely make this a lot easier, but right now as I'm just applying heat to this cab roof, it's just getting dissipated throughout the entire model, and this area isn't actually getting hot enough to melt any of the solder. So, unfortunate, but you know, if I had better tools, I would do it correctly, but I don't, so I'll have to come back later and fix it when I do have them. So for right now, glue it is. Now that the glue is mostly dry, I've got the locomotive back up on the test track. I'm going to apply some power here and fire it up. And we're going to see if this works now. Seems to be just fine going forward. And seems to be okay in reverse. So, I would call that fixed. As a side note, you may have noticed the cab light flashing against the motor. The reason for that is because the smoke unit is non-existent in this locomotive, so the RCMC is sending a signal to the smoke unit and expecting a response and not getting one, so it throws a smoke unit error, and that's why you get the flashing cab light. So if you disable the smoke unit, power it down, and power it back up, it fixes the problem. So I'm going to start on the antenna now. And to do it, I'm using this 30 gauge wire. This is solid copper wire, and this fits perfectly in the stanchions that already exist on the locomotive. So I need to remove the existing handrails and replace them with this wire that is formed to resemble what the current handrails look like. So the wires will not be as sturdy, but I will have good TMCC/legacy reception, and that is more important in my opinion. Now to remove these handrails, what you need to do with this locomotive is remove the smoke box door, and then the handrail should pull right out. This one was a little bit difficult because the stanchion all the way up here at the front of the smoke box wasn't releasing, so I had to pull it out and sort of wiggle and work the wire out of this particular stanchion. This also illustrates why I cannot use the original handrails as my antenna. The stanchions going down the boiler are brass, so this makes a perfect electrical connection, well maybe not perfect, but a near perfect electrical connection between the handrail and the shell of the locomotive, which is of course grounded. Your antenna cannot be hooked directly to ground because it will not work. So, on modern legacy engines, these stanchions are actually made of plastic, and that allows the handrail to be insulated from the shell itself, and thus the handrails can be used as an antenna with a solid brass wire like so. For this locomotive, because these stanchions are so specific to this engine, and there are 3 different sizes going down the length of the boiler, I need to reuse these stanchions, so I need a wire that is insulated instead of stanchions that are insulated, which is where the 30 gauge plastic insulated solid copper wire comes in. So now that the handrail is removed, I'm going to take my 30 gauge solid copper wire and I'm going to feed it through each one of these stanchions. The reason I selected 30 gauge is because 30 gauge is the smallest size, or the largest size rather, that fits through these stanchions without needing to modify them. Obviously, I could use a slightly larger wire, like a 28 gauge, if I had the time and patience to drill out each one of these stanchions to a slightly larger diameter. However, 30 gauge I think will do just fine for our purposes as an antenna, and I do not need to modify the stanchions in order to improve the reception. Now that I am at the last stanchion here, once I feed it through, I will be able to align the wire with the hole into the cab, and that will complete the wire going down the side of the locomotive, like so. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to push this wire through, pull it through the cab, and then figure out how to route it back up into the turret, which has holes that go into the inside of the locomotive shell. So once I get that figured out, I'll let you guys know, and I can start on the other side. Alright, so I got the wire through. So next up, I'm going to be taking the original antenna. I'm going to detach it here. And I'm going to strip that connection. And this is going to get soldered in. But before I do that, I need to run the other handrail. So here's normally how this goes. Once you remove the smoke box, in which case I have it back in place, but I've detached this front thing, the handrail should just slide out, like so. The other one did not do that. The other one was a lot more of a fight, but that's normally how it goes. Remove all the extra paint from that front stanchion, run my wire through, feed it into the cab, and pull it through. So now, flip the shell back around, and the way for this particular engine to feed this back through is there's a hole up in the top of the cab that you probably cannot see, where the wiring for the tender deck light goes, as well as the wire for the bracket that holds the tender deck light in place. When you fish this wire through, there are 3 holes on the inside of the boiler here, the firebox. So there's 1, 2, and 3. You should be able to find it through that first hole. And then once you do, just a matter of trying to fish your tweezers in to grab it. And once you've grabbed it, you can pull it through, making sure that it does not bind up on any of the knobs in the cab. And there we go. Now we have both antenna wires coming through. Now, as I was saying, I'm going to strip the original antenna wire, as well as the 2 new antenna wires. And now that those are stripped, I can take my little helping hand here that my brother got me for Christmas, and I can line up the wires so that they all join together. After I put a piece of heat shrink on it. Got my heat shrink. I'm going to put it on the left side here, even though it would probably be smarter to put it on the right so that it would help hold the wires together. But now that we have those aligned, for the most part, I can grab my soldering iron and solder these together. Now that those are soldered together, unhook my helping hand, run my heat shrink over, and I use the barrel of the soldering iron to shrink the heat shrink. Do a little pull test, and feels pretty good and solid, so I'd say that is a success. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to route these inside the firebox to make sure that they stay clear of the motor and the encoder ring, pull them taut on the outside up at the smoke box here, and cut them to length. Now, to keep the wires that are in this bundle away from the encoder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap them in a twist tie. I like twist ties over zip ties because twist ties are easily removable. And if I cannot untwist them, I can just cut them like a zip tie, whereas zip ties are only one-time use. So let's gather up all our wires here. Bend my twist tie in a U shape. Gonna hook around all of the wires that I need to bundle up and twist the twist tie together. I'm then going to loop the extra string, or the extra twisted wire, up around the wire bundle, and feed that back down to the side, where it'll probably be fine like this, but I'm going to anchor it with some electrical tape just to make sure it doesn't move. Alright, now that that's held out of the way, I need to grab my needle nose pliers and try to fish the cab light back into its home, like so. Make sure that its leads are bent down and out of the way. And then I need to reattach this bundle to this wall, and this whole shell should close right up. Alright, let's see if I can get this to cooperate here. Okay. I think that should do it for anchoring everything out of the way. So now, let's try to put this chassis back in its place. Now, if you've watched the 2-hour video of me installing Legacy in this engine, you'll know that in order to make this fit, I needed to cut the frame so the encoder ring could slide through the firebox. But with that modification, this fits right in. If you want to see more details on that, go check out the original video where I explain in a little more detail what exactly I did to put Legacy in this thing. So now that that's in place, let's press this down to get these screws in, and put in our smoke box screw, throw it up on the test stand, make sure that everything runs when it's all tightened down. If it doesn't, I have to pull it apart because some of the wires are interfering. And if I don't put the screws in, the motor does not sit fully into the chassis where it normally would operate, and it may not bind with a wire until the screws are put into place, which is why I'm doing all the screws and not just testing it as is. So let me do that real quick, and next time you see it, it'll be on the test stand. Now, really quick, I am going to try to estimate this wire length so that I can cut this free of the spool. So we're going to say that it needs to go to about there. Cut it a little bit long, just in case. I can fish it through the smoke box stanchion, like so. And for right now, we'll call that good. The other side will also need to be shortened, but I can do that in a minute. So let's put this up on the test stand, fire it up, and see if it moves. Okay, I don't have the tender on the track right now, so I can just test the functionality of the motor and drivetrain. So let's put some power on the track. Engine 19, box 1. I got my headlight, obviously no sound because I have no tender. Oh. Not sure if you can hear it, but I can hear it rubbing on something. So what that means is I need to take the engine apart again and figure out what it's rubbing on. So despite what I thought, the encoder was not actually rubbing against any of the wires inside the shell. What was happening is the encoder ring itself was rubbing against the sensor. So, to fix that problem, I took some 400 grit sandpaper and just held it between the motor and the disc and sanded away the backing of the plastic until it was far enough away that it no longer rubbed against the sensor itself. And as you can hear now, it is making very minimal noise. And if I bring it down to speed step 1 here, you can hear that there is no rubbing noise. So now that that is fixed, I can put the shell back on and test it out again. Now, along with the encoder ring that was rubbing up against the sensor, I did also find that the bundle of wires at the top of the firebox was too thick and was causing the encoder sensor to no longer become flush with the motor itself. That sensor being at a slight angle caused the corner of it to start touching the encoder, making another rubbing sound. I fixed this by removing the factory wire hold down at the top of the firebox, flattening out those wires and making sure that there was enough clearance at the top of the firebox when the motor was installed that that sensor would no longer become out of place. That sensor is only held down with some electrical tape on each side, as there is not enough space to fit the screw as intended by Lionel to hold that sensor to the motor without hitting the encoder ring. Because of this, over time at high speeds or due to excessive vibration, that sensor may become dislodged from the motor and thus start rubbing again. If that time comes, the solution is to just take the shell off, press the sensor up against the motor again, and put it back together. Not a very bulletproof plan, but it will work for the time that I have this engine. It's a custom build. What do you expect? If this was from the factory, from Lionel, I would expect no problems such as this, but because this is my build, it's okay. So now that the engine runs very quietly, as you can hear, I can now move on to finishing up these antennae. The main objective here is to simply recreate the shape of the original handrails. Per reference photos, this is very similar to the handrails that were on the Reading G3s, and thus is a good starting point. The big challenge we will face is that we are using solid core wire, which has a center metal rod that is much smaller in diameter than that of this brass rod, so this wire cannot be expected to hold its shape as well as the original handrails. However, we can get it close enough to create a realistic look, as you can see here. There are slight deviations as you travel down the boiler, but it is close enough to my liking. To create the bends that you see at the front of the smoke box, I am using needle nose pliers and my finger to create a crease and then bending that crease back until I get the look I am after. I will then cut the end of the wire off to create a prototypical appearance per reference photos. I will now duplicate this process on the opposite side of the locomotive, and that will complete our antenna assembly. Now the last thing I need to do before I'm ready to put this engine away is paint correction. I need to touch up some of these stanchions that I marred up removing the original handrails, as well as touch up this plate on the back of the cab that you cannot see. So I'm going to go through with some testers flat black and touch up those areas, and then we can throw it on the test track and I can let you guys listen to it. So there you have it. That is my repair and much needed upgrade to this SGL Line Reading G3 Pacific with Legacy Command Control. Having these antennae brings this engine one step closer to true trouble-free operation, and I look forward to operating this at club events or train shows where I can exhibit, now that I no longer have to worry about the TMCC or legacy signal dropout issues that I've had to worry about in the past. If you guys have any questions about the materials or processes that I used in this upgrade, feel free to drop a comment down below and I'll be sure to answer you as quickly as I can. Additionally, if you have any comments about any of the steps that I took in this, or if you think that there is anything I could have done better, again, feel free to drop a comment down below and I will be sure to listen to that feedback. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all learned something from this. This was a fairly straightforward process and a very simple upgrade, but it has massive improvements for operation. Again, I hope you all enjoyed. I am CW Hollow 1, and have a good day, or maybe good night in your case. See ya.